I stood there, clutching the lunch bag I'd packed for my daughter as the automatic doors hissed shut behind me. The smell of fresh wax and new engines filled the air, but all I could taste was humiliation. "Sir, you can't be here," my son-in-law said, straightening his tie like I was some stranger off the street. Stranger. After fixing his first car, after welcoming him into my family, after trusting him with my only child, I was now an inconvenience. The customers stared, pretending not to. My daughter froze by the reception desk, torn between loyalty and shame. And as I stepped out into the hot Texas sun, my reflection in the showroom glass looked right back at me, an old man dismissed. But what none of them knew was that the woman signing his paychecks used to call me mentor. Before the story begins, tell me, where are you watching from? I hope your day's gentle and calm. Please like, subscribe, and let's start our story together. The midday Texas sun glared through the glass facade of Coleman Luxury Motors, making every chrome edge and polished hood gleam like mirrors. Walter Grayson parked his aging Ford pickup between two spotless BMWs, his reflection bent across their curved bodies. He straightened his shirt collar, plaid, neatly pressed, and took a brown paper lunch bag from the passenger seat. Inside, a homemade sandwich and an apple. Nothing fancy. Just something his daughter Lindsay liked when she was a girl. He stepped into the dealership, greeted by the cold whoosh of air conditioning and the sharp scent of tire wax and coffee. The place pulsed with quiet money, espresso machines humming, salesmen's laughter rehearsed, customers' smiles half-interested but hungry for validation. At the center of the showroom stood Travis Coleman, tall, tan, voice booming, just loud enough to be heard across the floor. He wore a navy suit that seemed a size too confident. Walter stopped a few steps away, watching as Travis gestured toward a gleaming Mercedes sedan. "You see," Travis told a well-dressed couple, "this business is family. My wife's part of it, my team's part of it. We build trust, not just cars." The words "family success" echoed in the air, smooth as sales pitch polish. Walter smiled faintly, pride catching in his throat. Maybe Travis really had grown into something steady. Maybe this visit would be simple. When Travis turned and spotted him, that faint hope cracked. His salesman's smile froze, then dropped. "Walter?" His tone cut through the ambient music, sharp and irritated. "What are you doing here?" Walter lifted the paper bag. "Thought I'd surprise Lindsay with lunch." His voice was calm, old-fashioned, respectful. Travis glanced around. A couple of customers had paused, curious. He lowered his voice, but not enough. "You can't be wandering around here, Walter. This is a professional space." Walter blinked, unsure he'd heard right. "Just saying?" "Hi, son," he said softly. The word son came from habit, not arrogance. But Travis stiffened, like the word itself dirtied his tailored sleeves. "We run a luxury brand here," he said, voice tightening, "not a retirement club." The words landed heavy. One of the customers coughed, pretending to check his phone. Another gave a polite smile and drifted toward the coffee station, uncomfortable. Walter stood still, face unreadable but heart stinging deep. He nodded once, slow. "Didn't mean to embarrass you." Travis didn't answer, just waved toward the door like he was clearing dust off a shelf. Walter's fingers tightened around the lunch bag until the paper crinkled. He placed it quietly on a counter near the receptionist, eyes down. Then he turned, walking out under the fluorescent lights. His shoes made small, soft sounds against the marble. Footsteps of a man disappearing politely from his own family's pride. Outside, the Texas heat hit him again, sharp and blinding. He stood by his old truck for a long moment before getting in. Through the dealership's glass, he could see Travis already back in motion, laughing with the same couple, performing charm again as if nothing had happened. Walter looked toward the reflection of the showroom in the polished hood of a nearby Mercedes. The silver surface bent his image. The lines of his face multiplied, distorted. Behind that reflection, the word luxury gleamed in bold chrome letters. He whispered almost to himself, "Guess I don't fit the brand." For a moment, he just sat there in silence, his hands still on the truck's door handle, listening to the muffled hum of dealership life behind him. Deals being made, engines revving, his daughter's world moving on without him. Then he started the engine, slow and steady. The rumble was old but honest, the kind that didn't need polish to prove it worked. As he backed out of the lot, the glass showroom caught one last reflection of his truck pulling away. Inside, Travis was still smiling that showroom smile, the one that sold cars, but cost something deeper. Walter didn't look back again, but in the rearview mirror, that hurt expression, small, quiet, reflected in a passing hood, said everything he didn't. And under it all, something unseen began to stir. Not anger yet, just the low ignition of pride, refusing to stay broken. The air outside the dealership was heavy, still holding the smell of tire rubber and heat. Walter stood beside his old pickup, keys cold in his hand. His reflection wavered in the windshield, tired eyes, a jaw set not in anger, but disbelief. He'd spent a lifetime building machines that spoke through precision and respect. Now, his own son-in-law had spoken to him like a stranger trespassing. The automatic doors hissed open behind him. Travis's voice tore through the quiet, sharp and echoing. "Don't come back, Walter. You hear me?" Heads turned from across the parking lot. A salesman pretending to check inventory, a couple glancing over from their new test drive. Walter froze, the key halfway to the ignition. Travis stormed across the lot, his polished shoes clapping against the asphalt. "You think you can just walk in and make me look like some joke? This is my place." His voice cracked under its own weight. Walter didn't turn. His voice, when it came, was soft. "Didn't mean to cause a scene, son." That only fueled Travis further. His face flushed, sweat catching the sunlight. "You already did. You think people don't talk? You coming in here looking like some lost retiree? Calling me son in front of clients?" Walter finally looked at him, calm as still water. "That's what you are." For a second, the wind went quiet. Then a car door slammed somewhere nearby, the sound of something final. A familiar voice broke in. "Travis, what are you doing?" Lindsay's heels clicked fast across the pavement as she rushed from her SUV. Her hair was pinned neatly, her blouse still worked perfect, but her face showed panic. She stepped between them, hands up like someone trying to stop a collision. "Please," she said, turning to her husband. "People are watching." Travis scoffed. "Good. Let them see what happens when people cross the line." Walter stayed silent, eyes down. He didn't want to see her torn expression. The silent plea between them that said, "Dad, please don't make this worse." Travis pointed toward him, voice lowering, but venom still clinging. "You want him embarrassing me again, Lindsay? You really want this man walking around like he owns the place?" She opened her mouth, but no words came. Walter just nodded, slow and deliberate. There was nothing left to say. Across the lot, Jason, the head mechanic, had stepped out from the service bay. Grease still marked his hands. He watched the scene unfold, jaw tightening. He'd heard stories about Walter Grayson. Old school, brilliant, decent. And seeing him treated like that twisted something deep in his gut. When Travis finally turned away, muttering under his breath, Lindsay stayed frozen. Walter walked to his truck, movement steady, the kind of calm that hides the deepest humiliation. He pulled the door shut, and the sound echoed through the open lot, like punctuation on a silence no one wanted to acknowledge. The engine coughed to life, loyal but tired. Walter shifted into reverse. Lindsay took a step forward, as if to speak, then stopped. Travis caught her wrist gently, pretending to guide her away, but his grip looked more like control than care. As Walter rolled towards the exit, the large Coleman luxury motor sign loomed ahead, silver letters bold against the blue Texas sky. In the side mirror, he caught the reflection of Travis standing tall beside his daughter, posture proud, expression cold. The dealership shrank behind him, sunlight glinting off the glass until it looked like a mirage. Each passing second made it smaller, less important, but the sting stayed the same, the kind that seeps into a man's bones. At a red light, he exhaled. His hand, trembling slightly, reached to open the glove compartment. A few old papers, a pair of sunglasses, and a business card, yellowed around the edges. He turned it over slowly. Eleanor Briggs, CEO, Briggs Auto Group. The name pulled a faint, almost imperceptible smile from him. Not joy, not yet, but memory. The kind that carries weight. The light turned green. Walter slid the card into his shirt pocket and drove forward, the dealership disappearing behind him for good. But something new, faint and dangerous, beginning to idle beneath the quiet. The house was quiet in that way only old homes can be. Still air, ticking clocks, the faint hum of a refrigerator holding on longer than it should. Walter sat at the kitchen table, the same one he'd shared with his late wife for 30 years, staring at the landline phone on the counter. Its blinking red light told him he'd missed a call earlier. He didn't bother checking who it was. Outside, dusk fell over the small Texas neighborhood, and the sound of a distant train faded behind the rustle of trees. Walter poured himself a bowl of canned soup, chicken and rice, the kind that tasted mostly of salt and habit. He wasn't hungry, but it gave his hands something to do. When the phone rang again, he hesitated, then answered. "Dad?" Lindsay's voice came through, small, tense, almost breaking. Walter leaned back in his chair. "Hey, sweetheart." "I wanted to call earlier," she said quickly. "But Travis, he's under a lot of pressure right now." Walter said nothing for a moment. He could hear her voice tremble through the line, the sound of someone trying to hold peace between two storms. "Pressure doesn't excuse disrespect," he said finally. His tone was soft, but it carried weight, the kind of weight that only truth can have. There was a pause, then a sigh. "I know," she said, almost whispering. "He shouldn't have said those things. Please don't make me choose between you two." Walter's eyes fell to the tabletop. The varnish was cracked, where years of plates had rested, where laughter and arguments and long silences had left invisible fingerprints. "I'd never ask you to choose," he said quietly. "You already did when you married him." That silence, that wounded kind, filled the line again. Then a soft sniffle. "I'm sorry, Dad." "It's okay," he said, though it wasn't. "You go get some rest." "Love you," she said weakly. "Love you too," he replied, and the line went dead. Walter sat for a while, holding the receiver against his chest, as if the warmth from her voice might linger there. Then he set it down and took a sip of soup. It had gone cold. He didn't bother reheating it. From the living room, the TV murmured, "Some late night. Rerun of a car commercial." Bright, confident voices filled the space that used to be filled with conversation. Briggs Auto Group, built on legacy. The slogan echoed, metallic and rehearsed, until it began to sting. Walter looked up at the wall above the TV. A framed document hung there, yellowed slightly with time. His name printed clean and proud across the top, Walter L. Grayson, patent design, 1994, Vantage suspension system. He stood slowly, carrying his soup bowl to the sink, then walked toward the frame. The light from the screen flickered across it, revealing faint dust along the glass. His fingers brushed the surface, tracing the faded lines of the design he'd once sketched on napkins and blueprints back when ideas came faster than sleep. That design had once meant everything, proof that hard work built something lasting. But tonight, it just felt like a relic, a photo of someone who used to matter. He whispered the word under his breath. Legacy. It came out bitter, the taste of rust and regret. Outside, the neighborhood was still. A dog barked in the distance, then silence again. Walter turned off the TV, plunging the room into quiet. The only sound left was the ticking clock and the faint clink of his wedding ring against the counter as he rested his hand there. He looked once more at that framed patent, the dream of a younger man who believed respect was earned once and kept forever. Now, he wasn't so sure. And as the clock ticked on, his gaze hardened slightly, not in anger, but in something colder, steadier, the kind of silence that comes before a man decides he's had enough of being forgotten. The next morning came slow, gray, and quiet. Walter was in his garage, a squat metal building behind his house, its roof rusted around the edges, the air thick with the scent of oil and dust. A single bulb hung from the ceiling, flickering faintly above a workbench, scattered with wrenches, screws, and half-finished repairs. His old pickup sat in the center, hood down, waiting. He had the radio on low, some country station bleeding through static. The kind of music you didn't listen to, just felt in the background of your day. Outside, tires crunched on gravel. A truck door shut. Walter turned as Jason, the head mechanic from Travis's dealership, walked in, wiping his hands with a shop rag. The younger man looked out of place in this quiet space, like someone visiting an old chapel. "Mr. Grayson," Jason said, tipping his head politely. "Didn't mean to just drop by." Walter nodded. "You found the place." "Hard to miss," Jason said, glancing around the cluttered shop. "Smells like real work gets done here." A hint of a smile creased Walter's face. "Some days." Jason's eyes drifted toward the pickup. "Heard what happened at the dealership. Travis can be, well, Travis." Walter said nothing. He just leaned against his workbench, crossing his arms. Jason, Yang, hesitated, then added, "You used to design the Vantage series, didn't you? The 94s? That suspension was yours." Walter looked down, rubbing grease off his fingers with a rag. "Long time ago." Jason grinned. "Man, those cars still handle smoother than anything we get now. Travis thinks Torque is a clothing brand." Walter couldn't help it. A small, rough laugh escaped him. The sound broke something heavy in the air. Jason laughed too, shaking his head. "Guess some of us still care about how things work instead of how they look." For a moment, they stood in easy silence, the kind of quiet that forms between men who don't need to explain themselves. Jason gestured toward Walter's truck. "Mind if I take a look? Sounds like she's been coughing a bit on startup." Walter shrugged. "She's old, like me." "Yeah, but old doesn't mean done," Jason said, already reaching for the latch. The hood lifted with a long metallic creak. Dust motes floated through the beam of morning light spilling in through the open garage door. Jason leaned in, humming low. "You kept the original block. Nice. These engines don't quit unless someone gives up on them first." Walter watched him work. The careful movements, the respect for the machine. It reminded him of something he'd lost somewhere between factories and family arguments. Jason glanced up. "You ever think about coming by the shop again? You know, not as a visitor?" Walter shook his head. "I'm done with all that." Jason tightened a bolt, smirking slightly. "Sure, and I'm the CEO of Mercedes." Walter smiled again, faint but real. For a few minutes, they worked side by side. No talking, just the rhythm of tools, the hiss of the air compressor, the steady hum of two men who understood what it meant to fix something with their hands. When Jason finally closed the hood, he looked at Walter, his tone softer. "You know, sir, you don't just build cars. You build the way people drive them. Don't let someone like Travis make you forget that." Walter didn't answer, but his eyes said enough. Gratitude, maybe, or something waking beneath it. Jason tossed his rag on the workbench. "If you need a hand with this old girl again, you know where to find me." "Appreciate it," Walter said quietly. Jason nodded once, then stepped out into the sunlight, leaving the garage door open behind him. Walter stood still, looking at the hood of his truck. His hand rested on the cool metal, feeling the weight, the promise of something not yet done. Then, with a slow, deliberate motion, he lifted the hood again. The hinges groaned, the light caught the chrome, and the sound echoed through the empty space like an engine taking its first breath. Something inside him, quiet for too long, was starting to turn. The next evening, rain tapped softly against the garage roof, steady and patient. Walter sat at his workbench, surrounded by open manuals, old design sketches, and the scattered pieces of a life that once revolved around engines and precision. A single desk lamp threw a cone of yellow light across the clutter, illuminating an old leather notebook lying half open near his elbow. He reached for it, the same notebook he'd carried through his years at Ford Motors' Detroit lab. Pages worn thin, corners frayed, each line filled with the handwriting of a younger man who still believed the world respected hard work. Between two pages, a yellowing business card slipped loose. He picked it up carefully, brushing off a film of dust. The print had faded, but the name still gleamed faintly in bold letters. Eleanor Briggs, Assistant to CEO, Briggs Motor Development. For a long moment, Walter just stared at it. That name took him back to the test track in Detroit nearly 30 years ago. Rain pouring, a prototype engine sputtering, Eleanor pacing nervously while investors waited. Back then, she was a young engineer with a fire that outshone the men around her, and Walter, still in his prime, had fixed her failing prototype in a single night. She'd never forgotten. He turned the card over, a phone number still printed in that same clean corporate font. He hesitated. He hadn't spoken to her in over 2 decades. For all he knew, she'd long since moved on, built an empire, forgotten the faces who helped her climb. But something inside him said otherwise. He picked up the landline, dial tone, then the rhythmic click of numbers, one by one. It rang twice before a crisp voice answered. Briggs Auto Group. This is... Walter hesitated. Hi, I'm trying to reach Eleanor Briggs. There was a pause. May I ask who's calling? He cleared his throat. Tell her it's Walter Grayson, from the Vantage Project. Silence. Then the faint sound of a receiver being set down, footsteps, and another click as the line picked back up. Walter Grayson. The voice that came through was unmistakable, smooth, confident, and touched with genuine surprise. The man who saved my first prototype from dying on the track. My God, it's been what, 25 years? Walter smiled softly. Something like that. I still tell that story, she said, the night a quiet engineer taught Detroit what problem-solving really meant. He chuckled under his breath. Didn't think anyone remembered. Oh, I remember. You gave me my start. Her tone shifted slightly, more grounded now. And, judging by this call, you wouldn't be reaching out unless something had gone wrong. Walter hesitated. He wasn't ready to tell her the whole truth. Not yet. Just checking in, that's all. She didn't buy it. Walter, let me make this simple. I'm expanding Briggs Auto's Dallas headquarters next week. We're building something new, something that still values engineers over marketers. Why don't you come by? Let's talk engines. And, respect. The word hung there. Respect. Like it had been waiting for him all this time. He leaned back in his chair, the phone pressed lightly to his ear. Dallas, huh? Dallas, she confirmed. And bring that old notebook of yours. I have a feeling it's still full of good ideas. When the call ended, Walter sat in silence for a long while. Rain still whispered against the windows, the sound mingling with the faint hum of the garage light. He looked down at the open notebook, pages filled with designs, formulas, and quiet dreams that had never quite died. His hand closed it slowly. The sound of the cover snapping shut echoed through the small space. Outside, the storm began to ease, but inside, something else had started moving. A slow, deliberate ignition. Phase 1 had begun. The following Friday, the sun baked the glass walls of Coleman Luxury Motors, turning them into mirrors that hid more than they revealed. Inside, Travis Coleman paced the showroom floor like a man auditioning for a movie about success. His voice carried through the polished space, bouncing off the marble tiles. I told them, he said loudly to a young salesman, if Briggs Auto wants to compete in luxury, they better stick to lawnmowers. Their cars drive like tractors. A couple of customers laughed politely, the kind of laughter that feeds a salesman's ego more than it fills the air. Travis smirked, straightening his tie as he leaned against the hood of a brand new Briggs Limited Edition Orion X7, a model his dealership had been given to trial through a distributor partnership he barely understood. Pretty face, terrible bones, he said, tapping the hood. You couldn't pay me to drive this thing. Jason, wiping his hands near the service bay, looked up. His expression was neutral, but inside, he couldn't help thinking how poetic it was that Travis was mocking the very car that carried Walter Grayson's engineering DNA. Across town, the same model sat gleaming under softer lights in a rival dealership. Not as loud, not as flashy, just solid, honest. The way Walter preferred things. He stood beside the car now, running his hand over the curve of its fender, the kind of metalwork he recognized like a fingerprint. A salesman approached, cheerful and unaware of the gravity of the moment. Beautiful, isn't she? Briggs' finest craftsmanship. Only a handful of these in Texas. Walter smiled faintly. I helped design her bones. The salesman blinked, not sure if it was a joke. You mean you worked for them? Long time ago, Walter said, before everything got too shiny. He opened the driver's door and eased into the seat. The interior smelled like fine leather and faint ambition. When he turned the key, the engine came alive. Not loud, not showy, but smooth, like it was whispering to him, "You remember me." He drove it out of the lot, the salesman beside him, trying to fill the quiet with specs and warranty details. But Walter wasn't listening. He felt the way the steering wheel responded, the subtle give in the suspension as the tires rolled over the uneven edge of the service road. His hand tightened slightly, muscle memory syncing with motion. "Still smooth," he murmured, a quiet grin tugging at the corner of his mouth. He knew that feel anywhere, the balance between comfort and control, that delicate tuning that had made the old Vantage series legendary. It was his design, alive again, and better than ever. Eleanor had kept her promise to build on what mattered. They hit a long stretch of highway. Walter pressed the gas just enough to feel the hum beneath his feet. The wind cut through the open window, warm and sharp, carrying the faint smell of asphalt and rain. He didn't speak for the rest of the drive. He didn't need to. The car spoke in rhythm, every turn, every hum, every perfectly weighted response, like an old friend reminding him of who he used to be. Back at the dealership, he parked the car carefully, shutting off the engine with a kind of reverence. The salesman started his pitch again, but Walter interrupted gently. "I'll take it." "Excuse me? I'll buy it, outright." The salesman blinked, caught off guard. "Well, sir, this model isn't exactly—" "I know what it is," Walter said. "I built what it became." A short silence followed, the kind of pause that made even salesmen forget their scripts. Walter reached for his checkbook, an old habit, but one that still carried weight. He'd saved for years, mostly out of caution, never out of greed. Now, that savings would buy more than a car. It would buy a vehicle for something larger, dignity. When the papers were signed, the keys rested in his palm like a promise. He slid into the driver's seat one last time, the quiet confidence of the engine matching the calm forming behind his eyes. Outside, the late afternoon sky stretched wide and clear. As he pulled onto the road, the sun caught the Briggs emblem on the hood, a gleam of silver against blue sky. He didn't floor it. He just drove steady, steady enough to feel every curve, every echo of the man he used to be humming through the steel beneath him. In the rearview mirror, the dealership grew smaller, another beginning left behind. The car wasn't just a machine. It was a message on wheels, and Walter Grayson had just started writing the first line. The call came early Monday morning, just as the Texas sun began bleeding light through the blinds of Walter's small kitchen. He sat at the table with a mug of black coffee, staring at the fresh newspaper headline, "Briggs Auto expands U.S. operations." The words seemed to glow like a signal meant only for him. The phone rang. He almost didn't answer, but something, curiosity, instinct, made him pick it up. "Walter Grayson," a familiar voice said warmly. "Still an early riser, I bet." He recognized it instantly. "Eleanor," he said, smiling into the receiver. "Didn't think you still remembered my number." "Are you kidding? I still have your handwritten notes from the Vantage project. Half the reason my company's engines don't shake apart." Her tone shifted, now all business underlaid with affection. "Listen, I could use your help. We're in the middle of a national expansion, and I need someone who knows engines better than egos. Interested?" Walter hesitated, mug halfway to his lips. "You don't want to hire me. I'm retired." Eleanor laughed softly. "I'm not offering a job. I'm offering a consultation. Temporary, quiet, well paid. And between you and me—" She paused, deliberate. "One of the dealerships we're looking at happens to be in Dallas." That caught his attention. His silence was her confirmation. "I'll send over the NDA this morning," she continued. "Come up to our corporate HQ next week. Let's talk expansion." He exhaled slowly, eyes narrowing at the faint reflection of himself in the window. Older, but not done. "All right," he said. "Let's talk." A week later, Walter stood in the towering glass lobby of Briggs Auto headquarters in Detroit. The place buzzed with quiet confidence. Digital screens looping car ads, polished floors echoing the steady click of ambition. He signed the non-disclosure agreement without hesitation. The receptionist handed him a visitor badge marked Consultant W. Grayson, and suddenly he wasn't a retiree anymore. He was an engineer again. The next few days unfolded in a rhythm he'd almost forgotten. Long hours in design labs, late-night review sessions, the faint hum of test engines filling the sterile air. Young engineers gathered when he spoke, notebooks open, listening to every word like it was a master class. He didn't brag, didn't posture. He just explained the way torque really worked, how weight distribution wasn't math but feel, and the more he spoke, the more they respected the quiet man who spoke softly but carried a lifetime of precision in his hands. Sometimes, through the glass walls of her corner office, Eleanor watched him. There was pride in her expression and calculation. She knew exactly what she was doing, and so did he. On Friday afternoon, she called him up to her office. The view stretched over Detroit's skyline, factories, freeways, a city still rebuilding its name. "You've still got it," she said, handing him a cup of coffee. "Every person downstairs just asked if you're staying." "I'm just visiting," Walter said. "Temporary, remember?" "Of course." She smiled, then set her cup down. "We're finalizing a new acquisition strategy. Briggs Auto's about to buy out several dealerships across the southern region. Dallas, Houston, Phoenix." She paused, watching his face closely. "Including Coleman Luxury Motors." Walter's brow lifted, slightly. "You're buying Travis's place?" "That's the plan," she said. "We're still negotiating, but it'll happen." He leaned back slowly, processing the weight of it. Fate, irony, justice, all blending into something steady in his chest. "Then," he said after a long pause, "let's make it personal." Eleanor smirked, that sharp, knowing grin she'd always had when a deal was already decided. "Consider it sold," she said, "eventually." They stood by the glass window for a moment, looking down at the city where engines were born and legends were tested. Somewhere in the background, through a half-open lab door, a test engine roared to life, deep, strong, unapologetic. The sound rolled through the hallways, through Walter's bones, through every unspoken thought he'd carried since that day in the showroom. He smiled faintly, the kind of smile that doesn't reach the lips, but burns behind the eyes. Phase 2 was already roaring. Monday morning sunlight poured through the wide glass panels of Coleman Luxury Motors. The hum of espresso machines and the shuffle of polished shoes filled the space as salesmen prepared for another day of scripted smiles. Travis Coleman leaned back in his office chair, scrolling through his tablet. His expression shifted from casual interest to irritation, then to smug amusement. There it was, a headline on the Dallas Business Wire. Briggs Auto Group announces major expansion across North Texas. He read it twice, slowly, then leaned back, grinning. "Competition's desperate," he said aloud. A few nearby employees glanced his way. He waved the tablet like a trophy. "Briggs is trying to get into the luxury market. Cute, right? They're throwing cash at Dallas like it'll make them relevant." The younger salesman chuckled, relieved to follow his lead. "Guess we'll be showing them how it's done, boss," one said. Travis smirked, checking his reflection in the glass wall behind him. "Let them come. This town already belongs to Coleman Motors." Across the service bay, Jason wiped grease off his hands and caught a glimpse of the same headline on the break room TV. He didn't say a word, just let the corner of his mouth twitch upward. He knew something Travis didn't. Because that article, it wasn't about competition, it was about strategy. Across town, Walter stood at the edge of a dusty construction site off I-35. Wind carried the smell of concrete and diesel, mixing with the low thrum of engines and drills. The skeleton of a new building rose ahead, steel beams gleaming under the Texas sun. It didn't look like much yet, but the banner strung across the fencing told the story, coming soon, a Briggs Auto experience. He wore his old work jacket, faded and oil-stained, hands buried in the pockets. Watching men in hard hats move around, he felt something stir in his chest. Not nostalgia exactly, more like momentum. Eleanor Briggs walked up beside him, hard hat under her arm, her sharp heels crunching in the dirt. "We break ground officially next week," she said, glancing at the structure. "You should see the blueprints. State-of-the-art design labs, interactive customer bays. The whole thing runs on the philosophy you preached 20 years ago: simplicity and respect. Walter smiled slightly. You remembered that? I built a company around it, she said, then softer. And maybe now it's time we give credit where it's due. He turned to her, curious. What do you mean? Eleanor's gaze followed the line of the building's frame. I'm naming this branch after someone who rebuilt more than engines, someone who rebuilt what integrity looks like in this business. Walter chuckled, shaking his head. Don't you dare. She raised an eyebrow. Why not? You deserve it. Because that's not how I do payback. Eleanor smirked. So you are calling it payback. He gave her a sidelong look. Let's just say, call it quiet revenge. No headlines, no gloating. Let the work speak. The wind kicked up, carrying the sound of distant construction, hammers, engines, the clatter of new beginnings. Eleanor crossed her arms. All right, quiet revenge it is, but it still needs a name. He thought for a moment. Something that fits, but doesn't shout. She smiled slowly. How about Hale Motors? Subtle, simple. Old English for strong. Walter tilted his head, tasting the word. Hale Motors, he repeated. Yeah, that'll do. They stood together for a while, watching the sun slide behind the half-built structure. In the background, the crew's equipment roared to life again. Engines revving, metal grinding, sound swelling like the heartbeat of something being born. Walter exhaled through his nose, eyes narrowing at the growing frame. You sure you know what you're starting here, Eleanor? She grinned, slipping on her hard hat. Oh, I know exactly what I'm starting. The sound of engines rose again, deep and rhythmic, filling the Texas air. Not just machines building a dealership, but the pulse of something larger, something personal. Walter stood still, wind rustling his jacket, the faint scent of oil and dust thick in the air. He didn't smile this time. He didn't need to. The sound of that engine was enough. Somewhere across the city, Travis Coleman was still laughing at the wrong headline. He wouldn't be laughing for long. The air smelled like charcoal, sweet corn, and summer tension. Walter stepped through the back gate of his daughter's suburban home, carrying a small box of potato salad and a quiet sense of discomfort. Lindsay had called 2 days earlier, her voice carefully light. We're having a little cookout, Dad. Just family. Travis wants to make things right. Now, as he walked across the neatly trimmed lawn, he could tell that wasn't exactly true. Travis stood by the grill, wearing mirrored sunglasses and a polo shirt with his dealership's logo embroidered over his heart. The man looked like a commercial. Perfect posture, wide smile, the smell of ego stronger than the barbecue smoke. Walter, Travis said, turning with tongs in hand, glad you could make it. His voice was syrupy, practiced. Thanks for the invite, Walter replied, setting the salad down on the table. Lindsay hurried over, nervous energy written all over her. I'm so glad you came, Dad. It's been too long since we... Travis interrupted, flipping a burger with unnecessary force. Heard you've been keeping busy, he said. Consulting part-time, right? That's cute. Walter looked at him evenly. Consulting pays enough for gas, he said. His tone was mild, but his eyes never blinked. For a moment, no one spoke. Only the sizzle of the grill filled the silence. The tension between them hung in the air like smoke that refused to drift away. Lindsay stepped in again, too brightly. Dad, you want a drink? Lemonade? I'm fine, Walter said. He reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out a small, unmarked envelope. Actually, I wanted to give you something. Lindsay frowned, taking it. What is it? Just something for the future, Walter said quietly. She started to open it, but he shook his head. Later, he said, when you've got a quiet minute. She nodded, tucking it into her back pocket, still unsure. Across the yard, the faint buzz of conversation continued. Neighbors chatting, kids laughing near the sprinkler, the clatter of plates and laughter that didn't quite feel natural. But between Walter and Travis, the world had narrowed to a few square feet of grass and unspoken resentment. Travis flipped another burger. You know, it's funny, he said, not looking up. Briggs Auto just announced a new branch going up near my dealership. Some people are saying it'll hurt local business. But I'm not worried. The little guys always panic when the big ones move in. Walter's face didn't move. Competition keeps you honest. Travis chuckled, that same sharp, condescending sound. Honest doesn't pay the bills, Walter. Branding does. Lindsay shot him a look, quiet and desperate. Please, not here. Walter nodded slowly, the faintest trace of a smile at the corner of his mouth. Then I guess we built different engines. Travis didn't respond. The silence that followed was heavier than any argument could have been. The sun dipped lower, turning the yard gold. Plates clattered, the grill hissed, and Lindsay busied herself handing out drinks, anything to distract from the quiet battle still happening beside her. When Walter finally stood to leave, he hugged her softly, his voice low. You take care, sweetheart. Always, she said, forcing a smile. Travis gave a polite nod. Drive safe. Walter didn't answer. He just walked toward his truck parked out front, the long shadows stretching behind him. Later that evening, after the guests had gone and the last of the dishes were stacked in the sink, Lindsay remembered the envelope. She sat at the kitchen table, wiping barbecue sauce from her hands before opening it carefully. Inside was a single folded document, transfer of property, Grayson Garage. Her name was listed as the new owner. She read it twice, hand covering her mouth. Her father's signature was there, dated that morning. Tears welled before she could stop them. Outside, Travis's laughter from the living room sounded distant, hollow. She whispered, "Oh, Dad." Between heartbreak and gratitude, something heavy settled in her chest, an understanding that her father wasn't done fighting. He was just doing it his way. A week later, Walter parked his new Briggs Orion X7 across the street from Coleman Luxury Motors. The morning light bounced off the dealership's spotless glass like a mirror, sharp and blinding. For a moment, he sat still behind the wheel, his hand resting on the gear shift, his reflection flickering in the chrome badge of the steering wheel. He'd promised himself he was past the anger, that this was about quiet redemption, not revenge. But as he looked across the lot at Travis's gleaming name stretched over the entrance, that promise felt harder to keep. He stepped out, buttoned his jacket, and walked toward the dealership with the calm confidence of a man who knew more than he was saying. Inside, the usual symphony played, over-rehearsed laughter, the clink of coffee mugs, and the polished rhythm of sales pitches. A young salesman hurried over, clipboard in hand, flashing a smile that didn't quite reach his eyes. "Good morning, sir. Looking for something special today?" Walter nodded, voice steady. "I manage a small fleet. Thought I'd see what your luxury sedans can offer." "Fleet?" the salesman repeated, eager. "Absolutely. We've got excellent business incentives right now. Let me grab our manager." But before he could finish, Travis's voice sliced through the air from across the showroom. "I'll handle it." He strode over, grinning wide, all confidence and charm. Then he saw Walter, and the grin cracked just slightly before he caught himself. "Oh," he said, tone cooling fast. "It's you." Walter kept his expression neutral. "Just a customer today." Travis chuckled, a sound too forced to be genuine. "Sure you are." He turned to the younger salesman. "Go show Mr. Grayson whatever he wants. I'm sure he knows his way around a car." The salesman hesitated, sensing the tension but obeying. Travis walked off without another glance, already checking his phone, already laughing at something that wasn't funny. Walter stood there quietly, hands in his pockets, observing. Every exaggerated handshake, every salesman joke about family, pricing, every customer forced to nod along. It all painted a picture he already knew too well. Jason appeared near the service bay, grease-stained and focused. Their eyes met for the briefest second. Jason gave a subtle nod, nothing more, before pretending to adjust a tool tray. It was acknowledgement, without exposure, the kind of respect that didn't need words. Walter followed the young salesman through the rows of cars, listening to his script about horsepower, warranty terms, and luxury experience. His gaze flicked toward the manager's glass office. Travis was inside now, laughing with two assistant managers, gesturing dramatically. It was theater, all of it. Then, without warning, the glass doors at the far end of the showroom opened, and three sharply dressed people entered, carrying tablets, wearing Briggs auto badges. The room shifted instantly. Salesmen straightened their ties. Conversations softened. Travis looked up from his seat, curiosity turning into concern. "What's this?" he muttered, watching the group move toward the front desk. The receptionist whispered something to them. One of the Briggs reps smiled, professional but cool. Jason caught Walter's glance across the room and hid a smirk. Travis stepped out of his office, forcing confidence. "Welcome. Coleman Motors always has time for our friends from Briggs. You folks looking to buy a few cars? Maybe a partnership?" One of the reps shook her head politely. "Just a regional courtesy visit." Travis spread his arms like a showman. "Ah, I get it. Checking out the competition. Don't worry, we could buy Briggs out if we wanted to." His staff laughed, nervous and unsure if they were supposed to. Walter stood in the corner, watching, the faintest flicker of irony in his eyes. The words hung in the air like a dare to the universe, one that was about to be answered. As the Briggs team moved deeper into the showroom, Walter turned slightly toward the exit. He didn't need to hear more. Every arrogance, every careless laugh, every insult disguised as charm, he'd cataloged it all. Outside, he paused beside his car, hand brushing over the silver Briggs emblem on the hood, the same company Travis had just mocked. He looked back once through the tinted glass, where Travis was still laughing, unaware that the ground beneath him was already shifting. Walter opened the driver's door, slid in, and started the engine. The low growl of the Briggs motor filled the air, calm and confident, the sound of something waiting. The boardroom at Briggs Auto HQ was built for power. Floor-to-ceiling glass framed the Detroit skyline, the kind of view that reminded everyone why they worked as hard as they did. The long walnut table gleamed under recessed lights, a polished runway for contracts and strategy. Eleanor Briggs sat at the head, posture straight, expression unreadable. Around her were 5 investors, the kind of people whose pens could change the future of cities. At the far end sat Walter Grayson, dressed simply in a gray jacket, his presence quiet but commanding. He'd spent the last week assembling a report thicker than most novels. Data, customer metrics, employee feedback, all neatly summarized. But his voice, when he spoke, didn't need the slides. "Coleman Motors looks successful on paper," Walter began, his tone even. "But the numbers lie. Sales have plateaued, customer retention's down 12%, and employee turnover's higher than any dealership in the region." He clicked the remote, and a projection of the dealership's statistics filled the glass wall. "The problem isn't the cars," he continued. "It's leadership, toxic management disguised as ambition. If the people at the top don't value respect, it infects the entire structure." A murmur ran through the boardroom, agreement disguised as curiosity. Eleanor leaned forward slightly, her eyes never leaving Walter's. "That's why we'll replace it," she said firmly. "Not just buy the dealership, rebuild it from the inside out." One of the investors, a sharp-suited man in his 40s, tapped his pen. "And you're confident this acquisition adds value?" Eleanor smiled faintly. "It adds integrity, and that's more valuable than a few decimal points." The man chuckled, but she didn't. On the large screen, the final slide appeared. Acquisition proposal, Coleman Luxury Motors, Dallas TX. The figure below it was unmistakable. $28,000, full cash offer. The investors exchanged looks. No financing, no delays. It was a clean hit, quiet, lethal, and final. Eleanor slid the signed paperwork down the table to Walter. "Your analysis made this possible," she said. "We'll keep your involvement private, just like you wanted. Silent stakeholder, silent architect." Walter nodded. He didn't need his name on the walls, just the satisfaction of knowing whose hands would finally rebuild what arrogance had broken. As the contracts made their way from one end of the table to the other, pens scratched softly against paper. With each signature, the weight of the decision settled deeper into the room. A dealership changing owners, a reputation changing shape. When it was done, Eleanor closed the folder and looked at Walter. "We'll send the transition team down to Dallas next week. The reveal will come later. The right moment." Walter allowed himself a small exhale. Let Jason know what's coming, he said. He's the kind of man who keeps things running when no one's watching. Eleanor nodded. And tell him to keep it under the hood until we're ready. Walter smiled at the phrase. Mechanic language slipped into corporate warfare. He'll understand. The meeting adjourned. Chairs scraped, papers stacked, small talk resumed. But the air felt different now, charged with inevitability. The hum of engines from Joe. The test floor below seemed to rise through the walls, blending with the distant sound of rain on the windows. In the reflection of the glass, Walter could see himself standing beside Eleanor, the engineer and the executive, two ghosts of Detroit's past, quietly rewriting a man's future. Downstairs, in the legal department, a clerk fed the signed contracts into a scanner. The machine clicked rhythmically, stamping each page with a bold red mark, acquired. Every thud sounded like a heartbeat, every stamp, a turning gear. And somewhere back in Texas, Travis Coleman had no idea those gears were already in motion, grinding quietly, beautifully, toward him. The morning began like any other at Coleman Luxury Motors. Fresh polish on the showroom floors, complimentary lattes brewing, salesmen rehearsing their smiles in the mirrored glass. But outside, a line of unfamiliar black sedans pulled into the lot. The doors opened in unison, and a team of auditors stepped out. Neat suits, sharp tablets, and the kind of silence that meant business. Travis saw them through his office window and immediately straightened his tie. Panic flickered in his chest. "Nobody told me corporate was sending inspectors," he muttered, snatching his phone off the desk. He stormed out onto the showroom floor, clapping his hands to get everyone's attention. "Listen up. We've got auditors in the building. I want everything spotless, professional. No mistakes, no downtime. Move." Salesmen scattered like startled birds, grabbing tablets, straightening displays, pretending to be busier than they were. Jason wiped his hands on a rag and rolled his eyes from the service bay. He'd seen this act before, the confident boss who only cared when people were watching. By the time the auditors reached the front doors, Travis was already there to greet them, hand outstretched, grin wide enough to hide the strain. "Welcome to Coleman Motors. Always glad to host our friends from corporate." The lead auditor, a tall woman with a calm face and colder eyes, returned the handshake, but not the smile. "We're conducting a performance and compliance review," she said evenly. "We'll need full access to financials, service records, and employee reports." Of course," Travis said quickly, guiding them toward the conference room. "Just a formality, right? You'll find everything in order. We run a tight ship here." But as they began asking questions, his voice started to falter. Within the first hour, the auditors found mismatched figures in the quarterly reports, customer complaints logged but never addressed, and the one thing that made Travis's jaw clench, a sudden spike in fake 5-star online reviews, all posted from the same IP address. He laughed it off, too loud, too forced. "You know how customers are. Sometimes they exaggerate. We're just keeping up appearances." The auditors didn't laugh. Pens scratched, notes were taken. From across the floor, near the service entrance, a figure watched quietly, unnoticed by most. Walter stood there, dressed in a dark suit, clipboard in hand, blending in with the corporate entourage. No one had introduced him, and no one dared to question who he was. He walked slowly behind the group as they moved from showroom to offices, his eyes absorbing everything. The sales scripts taped behind counters, the inflated invoices, the polished but hollow charm that defined the place. When Travis passed him in the hallway, he didn't even notice, too busy trying to charm another auditor with his practiced grin. "You'll see," Travis said. "We're leaders in customer satisfaction. Briggs Auto's got nothing on us." An auditor scrolled through a tablet, unimpressed. Strange. Your online traffic dropped 40% after Briggs announced their expansion." Travis's smile froze. "Temporary trend," he said, voice tightening. "We'll bounce back." Jason, working nearby, caught sight of Walter, their eyes meeting for half a second. Jason gave the faintest nod. Acknowledgement, respect, and warning all rolled into one. As the day dragged on, the atmosphere grew heavier. The clatter of keyboards replaced the usual showroom laughter. Employees whispered, uneasy. The auditors spoke less and typed more. By late afternoon, Travis's confidence had worn thin. He leaned against his office door, wiping sweat from his temple. "It's just a formality," he muttered under his breath, trying to convince himself more than anyone else. From the hallway behind him came a quiet voice. Calm, familiar. Formality builds empires. Travis turned sharply, but Walter was already walking away, clipboard in hand, blending once again into the background noise of the corporate storm. The lead auditor checked her watch. "We'll finish our report by end of day," she said to her team. "Send it to Detroit for review." Outside, thunder rumbled faintly over the Texas skyline. The dealership's clock ticked toward 5, each second louder than the last. Travis looked at it, unaware it was counting down not to closing time, but to takeover. The elevator climbed in silence, the faint hum of cables echoing in the background. Travis Coleman stood inside, straightening his tie for the third time. His palms were slick with sweat, his pulse thudding in his throat. The message from Briggs Corporate had been short and cryptic. Mandatory meeting at headquarters, immediate attendance required. He tried to tell himself it was nothing, maybe an award, a partnership offer, a chance to get ahead of Briggs's new expansion. Still, something in that formal tone felt heavier than opportunity. When the elevator doors opened, the smell of polished wood and money greeted him. A receptionist led him down a hallway lined with glass offices and framed photographs of shining dealerships, places that looked nothing like his own. "Right this way, Mr. Coleman," she said, opening a door near the end of the corridor. Inside, the room was sleek, quiet, almost too clean. A long glass table dominated the space. At one end sat Eleanor Briggs, poised, confident, her gray suit immaculate. Papers were spread before her, signatures already in place. "Mr. Coleman," she said, standing with a polite smile that didn't reach her eyes. "Thank you for coming." Travis shook her hand, trying to match her professionalism. "Pleasure to finally meet you, Ms. Briggs. Didn't expect a personal invitation." She gestured for him to sit. "Please, this won't take long." He slid into the chair, adjusting his cufflinks. "So, what's this about? I heard you've been expanding. Hope this isn't a takeover meeting." He laughed lightly, expecting her to join in. She didn't. Eleanor folded her hands. "Actually, that's exactly what it is." His smile faltered. "Excuse me?" "We've finalized an acquisition," she said calmly. "Briggs Auto Group has purchased Coleman Luxury Motors in its entirety." The air seemed to thicken. Travis blinked, his mouth parting slightly as the words sank in. "That's impossible. My dealership isn't for sale." "It was," Eleanor replied smoothly, sliding a folder across the table. "To your investors. Quiet deal, clean transfer. The paperwork was signed last week." He grabbed the folder, flipping through it, eyes darting between numbers and legal seals. His face paled. "I don't understand," he muttered. "You can't just—" "Oh, we can," she interrupted, voice even. "But you'll want to pay attention to who will be managing dealer relations from here on out." A second door opened. Travis turned, half rising from his chair. The man who entered wore a dark suit, calm expression, and a gaze that could cut steel. It was Walter Grayson. For a long moment, no one spoke. The hum of the building's air vents was the only sound. Travis's mouth went dry. "You've got to be kidding me." Eleanor's tone softened with satisfaction. "Mr. Coleman, allow me to introduce our new head of dealer relations for the southern region, Walter Grayson." Walter walked to the table, eyes steady, not triumphant, just certain. He pulled out the chair opposite Travis and sat, placing a pen beside the open contract. Travis stared at him, disbelief breaking into anger. "You work for me?" he stammered, voice cracking. Walter looked up, calm as stone. "No," he said quietly. "You used to work for yourself. Now we both work for respect." The silence that followed was sharp enough to draw blood. Travis's jaw clenched, his breath short. "You planned this," he said, voice trembling with contained fury. "From the start." Walter didn't answer. He didn't need to. The paperwork in front of him said everything. Eleanor leaned back, watching the two men, the past and the present, staring, each other down across a table of consequence. She slid one final page toward Walter. Signature line's yours. Walter picked up the pen. His hand didn't shake. He signed each page with the same precision he once gave to every engine blueprint. Quiet, controlled, final. When the last mark was made, Eleanor pressed a seal to the document. The sound of the stamp echoed through the room like a gavel. Travis looked down at the papers. His name replaced, his signature erased. The dealership he'd built his pride on now belonged to the man he'd humiliated in front of customers. Walter rose slowly, buttoning his jacket. "You said once this was a luxury brand," he said, voice calm but cutting. "Turns out, respect is the rarest luxury there is." Travis didn't move, didn't speak, just stared as Walter extended a polite hand across the table, not for a handshake, but for closure. And when he didn't take it, Walter turned toward the door. Outside, through the tall glass window, a Briggs Auto banner fluttered in the wind, bright and new, hanging over the skyline. The ink on the contract was still drying, but the humiliation was already permanent. The morning after the acquisition, the air inside Coleman Luxury Motors felt heavy, charged, like everyone knew a storm was coming, but didn't know when it would break. Staff whispered near the coffee machines, glancing toward the manager's office where blinds were drawn tight. The dealership that once echoed with Travis Coleman's voice now felt like it was holding its breath. The sound of footsteps broke the tension. Walter walked through the glass doors, crisp suit, quiet confidence. Eleanor Briggs followed behind him, her expression composed, clipboard in hand. Together, they looked less like visitors and more like the new order. Travis was waiting. He stood by his desk, jaw tight, a practiced smile stretching across his face. "So, this is it?" he said. "You come here to play executioner?" Eleanor placed a folder on the desk. "Mr. Coleman, as of today, the transition of ownership is complete. You're being formally relieved of your duties as general manager." He laughed once, sharp, hollow. "Relieved? You mean fired?" "Terminated," she said plainly. Outside the office, staff began to gather, pretending to organize paperwork, but everyone could feel the shift. Jason stood near the service bay, watching through the half-closed blinds. Travis's voice rose. "You can't just walk in here and take what I built. This place is me." Walter stepped forward. His tone was steady, unflinching. "No, you built a showroom, not a legacy. There's a difference." Travis turned to him, face flushed. "You think you're better than me because you wrote a few blueprints 30 years ago?" Walter didn't blink. "No, I just never forgot who I was working for. The customer, not the mirror." Eleanor's voice cut through the tension, cool and certain. "We're not here to humiliate you, Travis. You'll receive your severance package and a reference, should you choose to use it. But this dealership will be led differently now. From humility, not ego." She turned to Jason, who froze mid-step. "Mr. Holt," she said, "you've been recommended for the position of operations lead. Your record speaks for itself." The room went silent. Jason blinked, stunned. "Ma'am, I don't know what to say." "Say yes," Walter said quietly, "and keep it honest." Jason nodded slowly, the weight of it sinking in. Around him, the other employees began exchanging glances. Relief, surprise, respect. Travis, however, wasn't ready to concede. He slammed his hand against the desk. "You'll regret this," he shouted, his voice cracking under the strain. "You think this little coup will last? I made this place what it is." Walter met his fury with calm. "I already did," he said softly. "Once." The words hit like a closing door, quiet but final. Travis's eyes darted between them. Eleanor poised, Walter steady, Jason now stepping forward to stand by them. Something inside him broke, not loudly, but visibly. He grabbed his jacket, yanked open the office door, and stormed through the crowd. Every step echoed. No one said a word. As he reached the entrance, he turned one last time, his face caught between rage and disbelief. Then he pushed through the glass doors, sunlight swallowing him whole. For a second, the room stayed frozen. Then, slowly, the staff began to clap. It wasn't loud, not even coordinated, just a quiet ripple of relief, the sound of people realizing the weight had lifted. Jason looked at Walter, unsure. So, where do we start? Walter smiled faintly. With respect, everything else follows. Eleanor nodded, approving. Hire from humility, she said again, more to the room than to anyone in particular. Outside, through the tinted glass, Travis's figure disappeared down the parking lot, his reflection swallowed by the sunlight and the dealership logo, the one that would soon read Briggs Auto Group. Inside, the echo of applause faded into the hum of the air vents, and Walter exhaled slowly, eyes steady on the empty doorway. The storm had passed, but he knew the next chapter was already waiting. The afternoon sun poured through the dusty windows of Walter's garage, lighting up the suspended particles of sawdust and oil. The place smelled of rubber, steel, and the faint sweetness of old motor grease. On the workbench, blueprints were scattered beside a half-empty cup of black coffee, while an open notebook displayed rough sketches of new dealership layouts. Walter was seated in his worn leather chair, glasses perched low on his nose, reading through a stack of financial reports. The space was quiet except for the faint ticking of a wall clock and the gentle hum of a radio playing some forgotten country tune. Then came a knock at the door. Hesitant, soft, familiar. He looked up. "Come in," he called, already knowing who it was. Lindsay stepped through the doorway, her eyes cautious, her posture uncertain. She hadn't been there in years. The sight of the place, the tools, the smell, the faint echo of her childhood, hit her harder than she expected. "Wow," she said quietly. "Nothing's changed." Walter smiled faintly. "Good engines don't need to." She stepped closer, brushing her hand along the hood of the old truck parked inside. "I heard what happened," she said finally, "about the dealership." Walter didn't look up from his papers. "What did you hear?" "That you bought it." He chuckled softly. "Technically," he said, closing the folder, "I just fixed it." Lindsay smiled, but there was pain behind it. She stood there for a long moment, watching him. The lines in his face deeper now, but the steadiness the same. "I should have said something, Dad. Back then, when Travis—" Her voice faltered. "I just didn't know how." He leaned back in his chair, eyes softening. "You don't have to explain." "I do," she insisted. Tears brimmed, though she tried to keep her voice level. "You were humiliated in front of everyone, and I stood there and said nothing. I let him treat you like that because I thought keeping peace meant keeping quiet." Walter rose slowly and walked toward her. For a moment, she thought he might scold her, tell her how much it hurt, how her silence had cut deeper than Travis's words, but instead, he put his arms around her, the embrace gentle, solid, unshaking. "Loyalty's not silence," he said softly. "It's learning. You learned. That's what matters." She clung to him for a moment, the dam breaking quietly. "I'm so sorry," she whispered. "I know," he murmured, "and I'm proud of you anyway." When she pulled back, her eyes were red but lighter. She looked around the garage again, the hanging tools, the worn blueprints, the faint hum of the radio, and smiled through the tears. "You always said respect isn't something you demand." He nodded. "It's something you earn and keep earning." Before she could answer, the door swung open again. Jason stepped in, holding 2 cups of coffee and wearing that easy grin that always lightened the air. "Boss," he said, pretending not to notice Lindsay wiping her eyes, "I brought you the good stuff from the diner. Thought you might need caffeine to fuel your empire." Walter chuckled, taking a cup. "Appreciate it." Jason's eyes flicked between them, then landed on Walter. "You crying, boss?" Walter smirked, setting the cup down. "Just checking fluid levels." Jason laughed, handing the other cup to Lindsay. "Glad to see you around here again, Mrs. Coleman, or—" He caught himself. "Lindsay." She smiled warmly. "It's good to be here." The 3 of them stood there for a moment, an old man, his daughter, and a loyal friend, surrounded by the hum of tools, the warmth of reconciliation, and the faint scent of oil and redemption. Outside, the sun began to dip, throwing golden light through the open garage door. Walter looked toward it, his expression calm, steady, like a man who'd rebuilt more than just a dealership. But even as peace settled in, his gaze lingered somewhere far beyond the horizon, on what still lay ahead. Because for all the fixing he'd done, he knew some engines, and some legacies, were still warming up. The morning sun spilled over the newly polished sign outside the dealership, Briggs Auto Group, Hale Motors Division. The chrome letters gleamed, spotless, proud, and new. Cameras were already lined up along the sidewalk. Local news vans idled by the curb, reporters adjusting microphones, their lenses reflecting the shimmer of a building reborn. Inside, the showroom looked transformed. The old Coleman Luxury Motors banners were gone, replaced by sleek silver and cobalt blue, Briggs colors. Employees stood straighter, their uniforms crisp, their energy different. The air hummed with cautious optimism, that feeling of something honest finally beginning. At the center stood Eleanor Briggs, sharp as ever, her posture that of a woman who didn't wait for applause. She commanded it. Behind her, Walter Grayson stood just off stage, adjusting his tie like a man who'd rather be under a car hood than under spotlights. Eleanor leaned toward the microphone, the crowd quieting instantly. "Good morning, Dallas," she began, her voice strong, confident. "Briggs Auto Group has built its name on innovation, integrity, and people who still believe respect is good business. Today, we're proud to reopen this dealership, not as a monument to ego, but as a tribute to legacy." Flashes popped from cameras. She smiled, a touch of warmth breaking through her executive edge. "And to lead this next chapter, we've invited a man whose hands built more than machines. They built trust. A legend of design now leads our legacy." The room filled with murmurs. Reporters leaned forward. Eleanor gestured toward Walter. "Ladies and gentlemen, Walter Grayson." For a brief second, he hesitated. Decades of humility made the stage feel foreign. But then he took a slow breath and walked to the podium. The crowd clapped, polite at first, then stronger as people recognized him. Not everyone knew his story, but they could feel something authentic in the way he moved. He looked out across the sea of faces, lights flashing, and smiled faintly. "I'm not used to microphones," he said, voice calm but firm. "Spent most of my life talking to engines, and they never talked back." The crowd laughed softly. He paused, then continued. "When I started out, I thought cars were about power, the roar of the engine, the shine of the steel. But I learned something over the years." His tone deepened, a quiet conviction settling in. "Cars are steel. Respect is harder." The sentence hung in the air, clean and sharp. Cameras clicked, capturing the moment like scripture. Walter nodded once, stepping back. "That's all I have to say," he added, and the crowd erupted into applause, the kind that starts slow and builds naturally, born not from spectacle, but sincerity. Reporters shouted questions, but Eleanor leaned in, whispering to him, "You just gave them their headline." By noon, every local outlet had it. Dallas Morning Ledger, "Cars are steel, respect is harder. Retired engineer redefines leadership." By evening, it was trending nationwide. At a dimly lit bar across town, Travis Coleman sat hunched over a drink, the flicker of a mounted TV reflecting off the glass. The broadcast replayed Walter's words, the image of him, standing at the podium, confident, respected, applauded, filled the screen. The bartender glanced at the TV, then at Travis. "Hey, isn't that your old place?" Travis didn't answer. He stared at the footage, his dealership, his staff, his life, now carrying another man's name. The sound of the applause bled through the speakers, mocking him gently. He drained his glass, jaw tight. "Yeah," he muttered. "Used to be." Back at the dealership, Walter stepped away from the cameras, shaking hands with employees, thanking them like equals. Eleanor watched him with quiet satisfaction, knowing exactly what she'd set in motion. For the first time in years, Walter felt peace. Not victory, not vengeance, just equilibrium. The weight of the past was lighter now, but he knew stories like this didn't end clean. They idled, they waited, because redemption, like an engine, still needed tuning. 2 weeks after the press conference, peace didn't last long. Success rarely lets you rest. The morning courier arrived at Hale Motors with a thick manila envelope stamped "Confidential Legal Notice." The receptionist hesitated before handing it to Walter, eyes nervous. He didn't need to open it to know who it was from. Inside, the letterhead read "Coleman and Rains, Attorneys at Law," and the first line made his jaw tighten. "Our client, Mr. Travis Coleman, intends to pursue legal action against Briggs Auto Group for wrongful termination, defamation, and loss of income." Walter closed the folder without finishing. Across the table, Eleanor Briggs sighed, flipping through the same document. "He doesn't even realize what he's doing," she muttered. "He's throwing stones at a skyscraper." They sat in her Dallas office, glass walls overlooking the city, stacks of files neatly arranged on the polished desk. Briggs's senior counsel, a calm woman named Laura Chen, stood beside a projector screen showing pages of audit reports. "Travis's legal team is posturing," Laura explained. "They're hoping for a settlement, but we've got more than enough to bury the case before it begins." Walter said nothing. He just leaned forward as the screen flicked through evidence: falsified invoices, doctored service records, internal complaints signed by multiple employees. Each slide was another nail in the coffin of Travis's arrogance. Laura continued, "This isn't wrongful termination. It's fraud and mismanagement, documented over 3 fiscal years. He cooked his own numbers to inflate bonuses. And these customer complaints." She paused, scrolling. "Half of them were deleted manually by his account." Eleanor glanced at Walter. "You still want to keep this quiet?" He nodded once. "No press, no gloating. We handle it clean." Laura smiled faintly. "Then I'll file a counterclaim for damages and request immediate dismissal. He won't recover from this one." Walter tapped the table lightly, thoughtful. "No counterclaim," he said. Laura blinked. "Excuse me?" He met her eyes. "No retaliation. Let the evidence speak for itself. We don't destroy people. We rebuild what they broke." For a moment, no one spoke. Then Eleanor leaned back, studying him. "You really mean that?" Walter nodded. "Yeah, if we play it the way he played us, we become him. And that's not why we're here." The attorney hesitated, then nodded. "Understood. We'll proceed with dismissal only." Laura gathered the documents, sealing them into a final packet. "All we need is your signature, Mr. Grayson. This closes your side of it. No retaliation clause included." Walter signed slowly, pen gliding over the line with quiet conviction. When he set it down, it felt less like winning and more like balance. The final turn of a wrench, bringing everything into alignment. Eleanor smiled, the kind that comes from both pride and recognition. "You know," she said, "you're a better CEO than I ever was." Walter chuckled under his breath. "I'm just an old mechanic who got tired of watching people forget what work means." She stood, offering her hand. "Whatever you are, you just taught this company something we can't put in a manual." Later that week, Briggs Auto's board convened to close the matter. The ruling came in swiftly. Travis's case dismissed, his reputation officially dismantled. The boardroom filled with quiet applause, not the loud celebratory kind, but the respectful rhythm of people acknowledging integrity. Eleanor turned to Walter, saying softly, "Revenge is easy. Respect's the hard part." Walter gave a small nod, gaze steady. Hard things last longer. Outside, through the office window, the city stretched beneath them, bright, alive, moving forward. For the first time in a long time, so was he. It was a bright Monday morning when Walter called the first all-staff meeting under the new Briggs Hale banner. The entire dealership gathered in the freshly detailed showroom, the glass walls gleaming with sunlight. There was no music, no stage lighting, just folding chairs, coffee, and the quiet anticipation of a crew that had survived a storm and was still figuring out what came next. Walter stood near the front, sleeves rolled up, clipboard tucked under his arm. The man didn't look like an executive. He looked like someone who knew how to work. When he cleared his throat, the room fell silent. "I won't take much of your time," he began, voice steady but warm. "You all know what this place has been through. Some of you stuck around when you didn't have to. Some of you kept things running even when no one upstairs was listening. That's why we're still here." He paused, glancing at the employees, mechanics, sales reps, admin staff, each one listening closer than they meant to. "This dealership," he said, "doesn't run on sales tactics or slogans. It runs on two things: honesty and torque." A ripple of laughter moved through the crowd. Jason, standing in the back with his arms crossed and a smudge of oil still on his sleeve, cracked a grin. "I'll drink to that," he muttered, earning a few chuckles from the team around him. Walter smiled back. "Torque keeps the wheels moving," he continued. "Honesty keeps the people moving. You lose either one, and everything seizes up." He gestured toward the front desk, where Lindsay stood beside Eleanor, taking notes for the company's new public relations rollout. "We're starting something new here: apprenticeship programs for young mechanics, honest financing for our customers, and partnerships with local schools to train kids who still believe working with their hands means something." Jason nodded approvingly, whispering to one of the junior techs. "That's the kind of stuff the old man used to say." Walter continued, his tone softening. "Some of you knew my late wife, Marianne. She always said if you want something to last, you build it right the first time. That's what we're doing here, not rebuilding what broke, but building something that deserves to stand." Lindsay looked up, eyes shining. He caught her gaze for a brief moment, the years of distance between them quietly folding away. "Now," Walter said, turning slightly toward her, "we've brought someone new onto the team. She's going to help us tell this story right." Eleanor gave Lindsay a small nudge forward. Lindsay blushed under the lights. "I'll be working in PR," she said nervously. "My job's to make sure the community knows this isn't just another dealership. It's a place where people get treated right." Applause rose, real, not forced. Walter smiled proudly, pride and forgiveness blending quietly in his expression. He waited for the clapping to fade. "I don't believe in perfect engines," he said. "They all need tuning. We'll keep tuning this place until it hums." Eleanor stepped up beside him. "And when it does," she added, "Dallas will know what happens when you build something with integrity." The room erupted again, louder this time. Jason clapped the hardest, shouting from the back, "Speech of the year, boss." Walter laughed, shaking his head. "I'm no boss," he said, "just another man trying to keep the motor from stalling." As the meeting wound down, a quiet energy filled the air, something lighter, freer. Employees mingled, chatting easily. The showroom no longer felt like a place of pressure. It felt like a workplace that had finally caught its breath. Over the next few weeks, the change was visible. Apprenticeships launched, new training sessions filled the bays, and customer reviews poured in. Not the fake kind, but handwritten notes from locals saying how different it all felt now. Mechanics stayed late because they wanted to, not because they were scared not to. A brief montage played. Out across the dealership's days, Jason teaching a teenager how to use a torque wrench, Lindsay taking photos of a family picking up their first car, Walter shaking hands with veterans at a charity event, Eleanor smiling from the background, watching her legacy multiply. One evening, as the lights dimmed across the empty showroom, Walter stood by the window. Outside, the Hale Motors sign glowed steady against the dusk, reflected in the glass. He didn't smile, not exactly, but his shoulders eased, and his hand tapped the window frame once, like checking a part you know is sound. The machine was running right again, and this time it was built to last. It was late autumn when Travis Coleman returned. The air carried that mix of diesel, fallen leaves, and memory that always reminded Walter of endings, and of things that somehow survived them. The dealership was closing for the evening, lights dimmed, the last mechanics finishing up in the service bay. Walter stood near the glass front doors, signing off a few invoices, when he noticed a figure hesitating at the edge of the lot. A man in a worn jacket, hands stuffed into his pockets, his confidence stripped to nothing but bones. Travis. He walked slowly toward the entrance, shoulders hunched, eyes down. Months had passed since the takeover, months that had clearly carved lines into his face. Gone was the polished suit, the sharp grin, the echo of arrogance. What remained was someone who looked human. Walter opened the door before Travis could knock. "You're a long way from your comfort zone," he said quietly. Travis nodded. "I know." His voice was hoarse, the kind that comes from sleepless nights and too many unsent apologies. "Can we talk? Just for a minute." Walter studied him for a moment, then stepped aside. "Come on in." They sat at a small table in the corner of the showroom. Outside, the sky bruised into twilight, the sign above the building glowing steady, Hale Motors, built on respect. Travis glanced up at it, then back down. "It's a good name," he said. "Better than mine ever was." Walter didn't answer. He let the silence do its work. After a long pause, Travis spoke again, words slow and deliberate. "I was wrong," he said, "about everything. The business, your daughter, you. I let ego drive me until I crashed everything worth keeping." Walter looked at him, not with pity, not even satisfaction, just truth. "You weren't the only one," he said. "I was right about you, but not about how I handled it. Staying silent didn't protect anyone. It just let things rot." Travis's head lifted, confusion flickering across his face. Walter continued, voice low but steady. "You wanted to win. I wanted to avoid a fight. Turns out we both lost the same way." Travis swallowed hard. "I don't expect forgiveness." Walter nodded slightly. "Good, because forgiveness isn't the point." He stood, extending his hand across the table. "Respect is." For a heartbeat, Travis didn't move. Then, slowly, he rose and took the hand offered to him. His grip was firm, but trembling, not from weakness, but from humility. When he spoke, his voice cracked. "Thank you for letting me walk in here at all." Walter's expression softened, the faintest trace of something like peace flickering in his eyes. "Everyone deserves a second start. Just make sure you build this one honest." Travis nodded, eyes glistening, and turned toward the door. Through the glass wall of the office, Lindsay stood quietly, watching the scene unfold. She hadn't told her father she'd come by to drop off paperwork. She didn't need to. Her hand lifted slightly to her mouth as she saw the handshake, the faint exchange of forgiveness that said more than any apology could. Walter glanced toward her as Travis stepped out into the parking lot. Their eyes met briefly, father and daughter, no words needed. She smiled through tears, a mix of pride and sorrow. Outside, Travis paused beside the curb, looking back one last time at the glowing sign above the dealership. The light reflected in his eyes for a moment before he walked away into the fading dusk, his shadow long but lighter than before. Inside, Walter locked the door behind him and turned off the showroom lights. The reflection of his own face lingered in the dark glass, overlapping faintly with the last glimmer of Travis's retreating silhouette. He exhaled slowly, not in victory, but in release. The past was quieter now. Not gone, but rebuilt. 6 months later, Dallas hummed with spring and possibility. The Briggs Auto Building towered like a monument to second chances, its glass facade catching the morning light. Walter Grayson stood inside the main conference hall, hands clasped behind his back, the faint murmur of voices surrounding him. A new plaque gleamed on the wall. Regional Director Walter E. Grayson. The title didn't inflate him, it humbled him. Eleanor Briggs had insisted on the promotion. "You've done more in 6 months than most executives do in 6 years, she'd said. "You didn't just fix a dealership, Walter. You rebuilt what people thought leadership meant." He'd tried to argue. She didn't let him. Now, in front of a small crowd of executives and journalists, Eleanor was officially announcing her retirement. The podium was decorated with a single banner that read, "Briggs Auto Group, driving respect forward." Eleanor adjusted her microphone, her smile warm but tinged with emotion. "When I started this company," she said, "I wanted to build cars that could outlast a generation. Walter reminded me that it's people who make legacies, not engines. And today, I couldn't be prouder to leave this company in the hands of someone who builds both." She gestured toward him. "Our new regional director and founder of the Briggs Veteran Training Partnership, Mr. Walter Grayson." Applause filled the room. It wasn't polite or corporate. It was genuine. Walter stepped to the podium, feeling the weight of every moment that had led him here. The humiliation, the rebuilding, the long nights spent sketching new ideas beside a flickering desk lamp. He spoke simply, voice even, but carrying through the hall. When you're under the hood, there's no hiding what's broken. You fix what's wrong, or the whole thing fails. People aren't that different. This company learned the hard way that honesty isn't a slogan. It's the oil that keeps everything running. The crowd was silent, listening, drawn in. He continued, "That's why this new program, the Veteran Training Partnership, matters to me. We're giving men and women who've served this country a way to keep serving, building engines, mentoring apprentices, and reminding the next generation that discipline and respect never go out of style." Applause rose again, louder this time. Reporters scribbled furiously, some already typing quotes. By evening, the headlines would read, "The man who rebuilt respect. Walter Grayson leads regional expansion." In the front row, Lindsay watched with a mixture of pride and awe. Her father had once sat alone at his kitchen table, eating soup from a can. Now, the entire industry was quoting his words. When he caught her eye, she smiled through tears, mouthing, "You earned this." Walter's gaze softened before he turned back to the audience. "We're not chasing profit," he said. "We're chasing purpose, because once you build that, the rest follows." Eleanor was clapping as hard as anyone, her expression a blend of pride and relief. She stepped forward, shook his hand, and whispered, "It's your road now." He leaned in, smiling. "You built the map." Later that week, the program launched officially. Veterans filled the new training garage, a massive, renovated space behind Hale Motors. Laughter and the clang of tools echoed through the air. Walter walked among them, checking torque settings, sharing small tips, never acting like an executive. Near the back of the workshop, a familiar figure was bent over an engine, sleeves rolled up, grease staining his hands. Travis Coleman. He didn't notice Walter at first. When he finally looked up, their eyes met. There was no tension this time, no resentment, just mutual understanding. "I heard you were hiring volunteers," Travis said, voice quiet, almost shy. "Figured I still remember how to teach kids about engines." Walter nodded. "As long as you remember what we're really teaching." Travis smiled faintly. "Yeah, respect." The two men shared a silent nod before Travis turned back to the car, guiding a young mechanic's hands across a wrench. Outside the garage, Lindsay snapped photos for the company's PR release. The caption, already written in her mind, "From rivalry to rebuild, how integrity became the engine of change." That evening, Walter stood outside beneath the soft orange glow of the setting sun. The new Briggs Training Center sign gleamed above him, the hum of life and progress behind its walls. Eleanor's office light was dark now. She was gone, retired, but proud. And for the first time, Walter didn't feel like the man left behind. He was the man moving forward. The sound of engines revved in the background. Not loud, not boastful, just steady. The power shift wasn't about control anymore. It was about restoration. And in that quiet, fading light, Walter Grayson knew one thing for certain. He hadn't just fixed a dealership. He'd rebuilt a legacy. The morning light poured into the glass front lobby of Hale Motors, spilling across polished tile and chrome displays. Cameras and cables snaked across the floor, microphones clipped to suit collars, lights angled to perfection. The dealership had hosted hundreds of customers before, but never a live television crew. Walter stood by the main desk, buttoning his jacket while a producer adjusted his mic. He wasn't nervous, not exactly, just quietly amused at how strange it all felt. A man who'd once been kicked out of this same building now stood in front of it, framed by news banners that read, "The man who rebuilt respect." The young anchor, polished and friendly, flashed him a smile as they settled into their seats. "Mr. Grayson, thank you for joining us this morning. I think it's fair to say your story has struck a chord. The community loves a good comeback, but yours feels personal. How does it feel to run the very place that once kicked you out?" A faint chuckle escaped Walter. He glanced around the showroom, the hum of honest work in the background, mechanics laughing, phones ringing, engines humming like low applause. "Familiar," he said finally, his voice calm, steady. "Except this time, the doors stay open." The anchor smiled, clearly delighted. "That's a great line." Walter shrugged lightly. "It's the truth." A soft laugh rippled through the crew. Someone behind the camera mouthed, That's going viral. But Walter didn't notice. He wasn't performing. He was just telling his story, the same way he'd always built engines, honestly, with his hands and his heart aligned. The interview went on, but nothing else landed quite like that line. The producer called it poetic. The anchor called it humble brilliance. Within hours, it was clipped, subtitled, and trending across social media. Millions watched the gray-haired mechanic-turned-director smile through the same kind of dignity that no boardroom could ever fake. By afternoon, the dealership's phones were ringing non-stop, not with complaints or questions, but congratulations. Old colleagues, local schools, even national outlets wanted interviews. Briggs Auto's marketing team could barely keep up. Jason burst into Walter's office just before closing time, waving his phone. "Boss," he said, grinning ear to ear, "you're famous." Walter looked up from his desk, half smiling. "Am I?" Jason set the phone down, showing him the video. The headline read, "Familiar, except this time, the doors stay open. Local hero redefines leadership." The clip looped, Walter's quiet voice echoing through the office. He shook his head slowly, a mixture of humor and disbelief. "All I said was the truth." "Yeah, well," Jason said, leaning against the doorframe, "truth doesn't usually get 10 million views in a day." Walter chuckled softly. "Then maybe the world's finally listening to the right kind of noise." Jason grinned. "You ever think about what it means, though? You really did it, man. You turned the whole story around. The same people who look down on you now quote you like scripture." Walter leaned back in his chair, eyes distant but calm. "I'm not famous," he said finally. "Just consistent." Jason laughed. "Yeah, but consistency doesn't trend like that." "Maybe it should," Walter replied, standing and glancing out the window. Outside, the parking lot glowed under warm evening light. Families loaded new cars, mechanics waved goodbye, and the dealership hummed like a healthy engine, steady, alive, honest. Jason watched him for a moment. "You know," he said, "poetic justice looks good on you." Walter smiled faintly. "Justice isn't the point. Getting it right this time is." The room fell quiet again. Somewhere outside, a customer honked their horn twice in thanks, a small, cheerful sound that broke through the stillness like punctuation. Jason grabbed his jacket and headed out, calling over his shoulder, "See you tomorrow, boss." Walter watched him go, his reflection framed in the darkening glass. The faint echo of the interview line still lingered in his mind, not as a soundbite, but as a truth he'd finally earned. The place that once threw him out now stood as proof that respect, once rebuilt, could hold its ground. And for Walter Grayson, that was enough. The ballroom shimmered with gold light and quiet anticipation. Chandeliers hung like frozen fireworks, the air heavy with the scent of polished silver and pride. The Dallas Business Council had gathered its finest, executives, entrepreneurs, and public figures dressed in confidence in designer suits. But amid the noise, Walter Grayson sat quietly at a round table near the front, his posture composed, his expression humble. The MC's voice echoed from the stage. "Tonight, we celebrate integrity and leadership, a quality too often lost in the pursuit of profit. The recipient of this year's Ethical Leadership Award didn't just change a company, he changed a culture." Applause rippled through the room. Cameras swiveled. Walter's name filled the hall. "Please welcome Mr. Walter Grayson." He stood slowly, the applause surrounding him like waves. The crowd rose to its feet as he approached the podium, not because he demanded attention, but because his story had earned it. He adjusted the microphone, cleared his throat, and let the silence settle before speaking. "I appreciate this," he began, voice low but strong. "But this award doesn't belong to one man." A hush fell over the room. "It belongs to every mechanic who showed up on time when the boss didn't, to every salesperson who told the truth even when it cost them a deal, to every hand that turned a wrench, filled a tank, cleaned a floor, or answered a phone with kindness instead of pride." He paused, scanning the crowd. His gaze wasn't on the executives in tailored suits. It was on the workers, the ones seated near the back, wearing plain jackets, hands folded, unsure they even belonged in a room like this. "Engines last," Walter said quietly, "but character lasts longer." The words hung in the air like an echo that refused to fade. Cameras flashed. Someone near the back whispered, "That's going to headline tomorrow." He continued, his tone steady. When you build something, a company, a car, a life, the temptation's always there to cut corners, to chase speed instead of strength. But what I've learned is this. Every shortcut costs more in the end. What holds everything together isn't the steel or the strategy. It's honesty. Lindsay, sitting near the stage, wiped at her eyes with a smile. She was filming the moment on her phone, her hands trembling slightly as the applause began again. Walter gave a small nod toward her before closing his speech. "I'm not standing here because I was better. I'm standing here because I was forgiven enough to try again. And if you take one thing from this award, let it be that mistakes don't define you. How you repair them does." He stepped back, letting the applause swell. This time, it wasn't polite or dutiful. It was thunderous. People rose from their seats, executives, workers, guests, clapping not for the title but for the truth behind it. In the back row, a man stood slowly, clapping too. Travis Coleman. His suit was modest now, his expression quiet. There was no bitterness in his eyes, no envy, only understanding. He clapped until the crowd's roar overtook the sound of his own hands. Lindsay noticed him through her phone's screen. For a second, she hesitated, then lowered the device and simply watched. Her father on stage, her husband in the back, both changed, both humbled by the road that had led them here. As Walter returned to his table, people stopped him for handshakes and photos, but he moved through them with grace. When he sat down, Eleanor Briggs leaned in from the next table, her voice soft but proud. "You turned redemption into leadership," she said. Walter smiled faintly, glancing toward the back of the room where Travis still stood. "No," he said, "just turned mistakes into lessons." The applause began to fade, but the warmth lingered, not the kind that burns with glory, but the kind that stays, steady and human. Outside the ballroom, the city lights glowed against the Texas night. And though the ceremony was over, Walter knew something far bigger was still beginning. The quiet kind of legacy that doesn't need applause to last. The ballroom at the Dallas Civic Center was buzzing with energy that night. Polished floors gleamed under amber lights, the clink of glasses and low hum of conversation filling the air. It wasn't a corporate gala this time. It was the Briggs Foundation charity auction, an event built to fund scholarships for young mechanics and engineers across Texas. The kind of people Walter Grayson had spent a lifetime believing in. At the front of the stage, under a velvet cover, sat the main attraction. A restored vintage coupe from the early 80s. Sleek, silver, with the faintest blue undertone that shimmered when light touched it. On the placard in front of it were 6 simple words. Designed by Walter Grayson, reborn by Briggs. Walter stood near the back of the room, away from the cameras and applause. He wasn't there for recognition. He was there for the machine. The auctioneer took the stage, voice booming with charm. "Ladies and gentlemen, our final item of the evening, a fully restored Vantage GT1, one of only 3 ever built, designed by the legendary Walter Grayson himself, a symbol of American engineering and resilience." The crowd leaned forward, checkbooks and digital paddles ready. "We'll start the bidding at 50,000. Hands shot up instantly. The numbers climbed. 75, 100, 120. The crowd buzzed with excitement. Each new bid felt like another tribute to a man who had rebuilt not just cars, but integrity. Eleanor, seated near the front, caught Walter's eye from across the room. She smiled knowingly. She'd arranged the donation, knowing it would hit close to his heart. The price rose higher. 180,000, the auctioneer called. "Do I hear 200? Walter's hand twitched slightly at his side. Not yet. Then someone shouted, 200 even! The crowd gasped, clapping. The auctioneer grinned. 200,000 going once, going twice. From the shadows, Walter lifted his paddle, his number steady, his voice calm. 250. All eyes turned. He didn't flinch under the lights, didn't explain, didn't blink. The auctioneer smiled wide. 250,000, going once, going twice, sold. Applause filled the room as the hammer came down. Eleanor clapped softly, the pride in her face tempered by understanding. Walter didn't stand or bow. He just nodded to the auctioneer and slipped the paddle back onto his chair. Hours later, when the guests had gone and the lights dimmed, Walter returned quietly to the covered car. A young event coordinator approached him with paperwork. "Mr. Grayson, I just want to say, it's incredible what you did tonight. The scholarships you funded, the car." Walter smiled faintly. "It wasn't for me," he said, signing the papers. "It's for where I came from." The next morning, a trailer pulled up to the dealership. Jason stood outside, rubbing the back of his neck. Confusion painted across his face as workers carefully unloaded the restored coupe. "What on earth is this?" he asked. Walter walked up beside him, coffee in hand. "Consider it a gift." Jason blinked. You bought this? That's your old design, isn't it?" Walter nodded. "And it's yours now, or rather, your son's, when he's ready." Jason's voice caught. "Boss, I can't take this." Walter smiled gently. "You can. Legacy shouldn't sit in a museum. It should drive forward." For a moment, Jason said nothing. Then he placed a hand on the cool silver hood, eyes wet, voice breaking. "You're one hell of a man, Walter." Walter chuckled softly. "Nah, just an old mechanic who still believes in motion." As the sun dipped low, its golden light spilled across the lot, glinting off the chrome curves of the car. The reflection caught Walter's face. Older, lined, but peaceful. The sound of an engine turning over broke the stillness, followed by Jason's son laughing from behind the wheel. Walter turned toward the horizon, hands in his pockets, the hum of the car echoing behind him. The road ahead was bright, and this time, someone else was driving it forward. The sun was low over Dallas, the sky painted in long streaks of amber, and rose as Walter Grayson steered his old pickup down the quiet stretch of highway that led home. The truck rattled faintly, a few loose bolts, a faint whistle through the vent, but it was steady, familiar. Every sound told a story he already knew by heart. The city skyline glowed behind him, fading in the rearview mirror, while the open road ahead stretched into calm, unhurried distance. His hands rested loose on the wheel, the leather worn smooth where decades of work had shaped it. He passed the new dealership, the same one that once bore Travis's name. The lights were still on, bright and welcoming, the sign now shining proudly in the dusk. Grayson Motors, built on respect. He slowed a little, the glow reflecting across his windshield. For a moment, he simply looked. No pride, no disbelief, just quiet recognition. As the truck rolled past, his mind slipped backward, flashes flickering through like headlights on dark asphalt. Travis's voice echoing in the showroom. "We run a luxury brand here, not a retirement club." The sting in his chest that day, walking out under the weight of humiliation while strangers looked away. Then the echo faded into another memory. His hand, signing the acquisition papers, the soft murmur of Eleanor's voice beside him. "You just bought back your dignity." A flash of the press conference lights, his own voice saying calmly, "Cars are steel. Respect is harder." And finally, the applause that followed, not because of spectacle, but because truth still mattered. Each flash passed through him without bitterness now, only gratitude. Every wound, every slight, every moment that broke him, it had been necessary, because only broken things know how to be rebuilt right. The radio hummed softly, a gentle tune from the local country station. Walter turned it down, preferring the steady rhythm of the engine. That low rumble, that was music enough. Up ahead, a small car sat on the shoulder, hazard lights blinking against the dimming sky. Without hesitation, he eased the pickup onto the gravel and came to a stop behind it. A young man stepped out, frustration clear in his face. "Sorry, sir," he said, wiping his hands on his jeans. "Battery's dead, phone too. I was just about to start walking." Walter popped his door open, grabbing jumper cables from behind the seat. "No need," he said. "Let's get you running." The young man blinked, then recognized him from somewhere. A billboard maybe, or one of those interviews. "Wait," he said, surprised. You run Grayson Motors, don't you? Walter smiled faintly as he clipped the cables into place. Just keep it running, he said. They stood together as the engines connected, the spark flickering between them. The younger man turned the key, and the car coughed once, then purred to life. Thank you, the man said, relief flooding his voice. Seriously, most people would have just driven past. Walter shut his hood and coiled the cables neatly. Most people forget how good it feels to stop. The young man grinned, then drove off, headlights cutting through the twilight. Walter stood there for a moment, the quiet of the highway wrapping around him. The sun dipped lower, painting the horizon gold. He leaned against the side of his truck, watching the world settle into calm, the same kind of calm he'd spent a lifetime chasing. When he climbed back into the cab, the dashboard light flickered on, illuminating the old photo taped beside the speedometer, him and Lindsay years ago, grease-stained and smiling beside the first car they ever fixed together. He started the engine. It rumbled deep and even, the way a good heart sounds when it's finally at rest. As the pickup rolled back onto the road, the camera of memory panned wide, the dealership sign glowing softly in the distance, the truck's taillights fading into the long Texas horizon. The road stretched endlessly ahead, straight and honest, carrying him home. No vengeance, no pain, just peace. The letter came in a plain envelope, with the Briggs Auto seal embossed in silver. Walter almost tossed it aside, thinking it was another sponsorship request, until he saw the heading printed at the top. Documentary proposal. The man who fixed more than cars. He frowned slightly, reading the brief summary. A local filmmaker wanted to produce a short documentary about Hale Motors, the Briggs expansion, and, inevitably, about him. Walter's first instinct was to decline. Cameras, interviews, storytelling. It wasn't his world. He'd already lived the story. He didn't need to perform it. But later that evening, Lindsay stopped by his garage. She found him sitting by the workbench, glasses low on his nose, the letter still unopened beside a half-assembled carburetor. You should do it, Dad, she said softly. He shook his head. I'm not interested in fame. I just wanted things running right. It's not about fame, she replied. It's about people remembering why things run right. You taught this town that. Her words lingered, the way truth often does. 2 weeks later, the film crew arrived. They were young, too young to remember the old dealership days, but respectful, curious, almost reverent. The director, a woman named Claire, set up a single camera in Walter's garage, surrounded by wrenches, blueprints, and that smell of old oil and time. He sat on a stool, uncomfortable under the light. I'm not good at talking about myself, he warned. Claire smiled. Then don't. Talk about the work. And he did. They filmed for hours, him sketching old suspension systems, talking through engine designs that had shaped his career. His hands still moved with precision, fingers tracing lines in the air like blueprints only he could see. The documentary intercut his words with archive footage Briggs had provided, grainy photos of Walter in his 20s, standing beside prototype vehicles, eyes bright and young. Then family photos, him with Marianne, with Lindsay as a little girl in coveralls, holding a wrench almost as big as her arm. The narration, calm and steady, carried through the footage. Some men build empires, others build engines. Walter Grayson built both, and then chose to rebuild respect when the world forgot how. As the film progressed, the tone deepened. They showed the dealership transformation, the training center filled with veterans, Jason mentoring apprentices under Walter's gaze. Then came the line that silenced everyone in the editing room. He rebuilt dignity one bolt at a time. When the documentary premiered at the community center, the hall was full. Mechanics, students, neighbors, even customers who'd once bought their first cars from him. Walter sat near the back, cap pulled low, quietly watching himself on the screen. He didn't see a hero. He saw a man who'd made mistakes and then worked until he earned peace with them. When the credits rolled, the audience stood in applause. People approached him afterward, some shaking his hand, others just nodding, moved in ways words couldn't reach. Lindsay hugged him tightly, whispering, "You did it." Walter smiled faintly. "We did it." A few days later, as life returned to its normal rhythm, he found a small envelope in his office mailbox. No return address, just familiar handwriting that made him pause. Inside was a postcard, the image of a quiet Michigan shoreline on the front. On the back, in Eleanor Briggs's looping script, were 5 simple words: "You made the right repairs." Walter sat there for a long time, the card in his weathered hands. His eyes welled, not with sadness, but with something deeper: gratitude, closure. He looked up at the photo wall beside his desk, Lindsay, Jason, the staff, the dealership sign glowing at dusk, and smiled through the blur. Engines fade, success fades. But some things stay tuned perfectly. As the camera of memory pulled back, the soft hum of an engine filled the air, faint but steady. Walter exhaled, the sound almost like laughter. He'd fixed a lot of things in his life, but this time he'd repaired something far greater. The ballroom of the downtown Marriott shimmered with light. Gold linen tablecloths, polished silverware, and centerpieces shaped like miniature engine blocks decorated each table. A banner stretched proudly across the stage, its letters bold and clean: the Walter Grayson Legacy Banquet, honoring integrity in industry. The event had started as a small appreciation dinner years ago, but tonight it had grown into a full-scale gala, an annual celebration hosted by Briggs Auto Group to honor workers who led with honesty and grit. Walter stood near the edge of the crowd, looking both proud and faintly uncomfortable, the way men do when their names are larger than they ever meant them to be. Everywhere he looked, he saw faces from different corners of his life: veterans in neatly pressed uniforms, young mechanics from the apprenticeship program, their hands finally clean but still marked by work, executives from across Texas, even a few of his old rivals from the early days, men who had once scoffed at his quiet ways, but now approached him with handshakes and respect. And there, moving between the tables in a crisp white shirt, was Travis Coleman. He wasn't seated with the executives or the dignitaries. Instead, he was helping the catering team, carrying trays, filling water glasses, moving with humility that once would have been unimaginable. When he reached Walter's table, their eyes met for a brief second. Travis smiled faintly. "Good evening, Mr. Grayson. Need anything topped off?" Walter shook his head gently. "No, son. You're doing fine right where you are." Travis nodded once and moved on, quiet, purposeful, at peace. As dinner wound down, Eleanor Briggs, grayer now but still sharp-eyed, took the stage. The microphone squeaked once before her voice carried across the room. "When I founded this company, I wanted to build cars that outlasted competition. Walter Grayson taught me to build companies that outlast ego." Laughter, soft and genuine, rippled through the crowd. Eleanor smiled. "Tonight, we honor not just a man, but a mindset. The belief that respect, once lost, can be rebuilt stronger than before. Please welcome the man whose legacy continues to keep us honest, Mr. Walter Grayson." The applause was immediate and overwhelming. Walter stood, smoothing his jacket, and approached the podium. The music faded and the room quieted, all eyes on him. He looked out at the faces before him, some young and eager, others older and seasoned, and spoke the way he always did, with simple truth. "When I was a younger man," he began, "I thought legacy meant the things you built, the cars, the patents, the buildings with your name on them. But I've learned something since then." He paused, his voice low but steady. "Legacy isn't what you leave behind. It's what you build inside people. It's the spark that keeps them honest when no one's looking, the thing that makes them choose respect over shortcuts." The crowd was silent, leaning in. Walter raised his glass slowly. The crystal caught the golden light of the chandeliers, refracting it across the room. "So, here's to every man who's ever been told to step outside," he said. His voice deepened, carrying a quiet power. "Step back in stronger." For a moment, there was stillness. Then the applause erupted. Cheers, laughter, the kind that comes from deep collective gratitude. Jason pounded the table with his fist. Eleanor wiped at her eyes. Even the catering staff clapped from the edges of the room, Travis among them. Lindsay rose from her chair, tears shimmering in her eyes as she leaned in to kiss her father's cheek. "I'm proud of you. she whispered. Walter smiled softly. I'm proud of us. The band began to play, a slow, steady tune that matched the rhythm of his heartbeat. Around him, people toasted, laughed, shared stories, and celebrated what he had built. Not an empire, but a standard. As the camera of memory panned out, the chandelier light bathed the room in a warm glow. Walter stood at the center, glass raised high, the sound of laughter blending with music as his legacy came full circle. And through it all, one truth echoed quietly beneath the applause. Respect doesn't retire. The evening was still and golden, the kind of Texas dusk that seemed to hold its breath before letting the stars in. The sound of crickets mingled with the faint hum of a cooling engine outside Walter Grayson's garage. Inside, the light above his workbench burned soft and low, casting long shadows across the room, shadows shaped by tools, gears, and memories. On the wooden desk lay a thick, leather-bound journal. Its cover was worn smooth from years of grease-stained hands, flipping it open after long shifts. The pages inside were a lifetime. Blueprints, sketches, notes, and reflections scribbled between margins, some technical, some personal, all honest. Walter sat down, the chair creaking beneath him, and picked up his pen. He hesitated for a moment, staring at the empty page. Then, in his steady, measured handwriting, he began to write. Humiliation is temporary. Respect is fuel. He paused, reading the line over, the faintest smile ghosting his lips. Yeah, he murmured to himself. That about covers it. He kept writing, his words a quiet rhythm against the ticking of the clock on the wall. There were years when I thought silence was dignity. Turns out, it was fear. I learned that you don't earn respect by demanding it. You earn it by doing what's right when no one's watching. You rebuild what others break. You forgive, even when you remember. And you keep the engine running, no matter how rough it gets. His handwriting wavered slightly toward the end, but the ink was steady, the thoughts clear. He signed his initials at the bottom, folded the journal shut, and placed it gently inside a drawer. Next to it, he set a small note addressed in block letters. For Jacob, Lindsay's son, 11 years old and already obsessed with engines. The boy had spent whole afternoons in this garage, asking questions about torque and pistons, eyes lighting up every time Walter handed him a wrench that was too big for his hands. Walter chuckled quietly to himself. Kid's got the bug, he whispered. The camera of memory panned slowly across the workbench, scattered bolts, a half-finished carburetor, a coffee mug stained with time, and the open pages of his earlier sketches. The designs were old school, curved fenders, elegant lines, signatures of craftsmanship from another era. Pencil marks, smudged but intentional, told the story of a man who'd never stopped building, even when life told him to stop trying. A soft, nostalgic score rose in the background, violins low and warm, like the hum of a trusted engine at idle. Walter leaned back, looking around the garage one last time. Every corner of it held his history, the first set of tools he'd ever bought, the calendar from his Ford days, the framed patent sketch, that same car model he'd designed decades ago, now reborn in the Briggs collection. He stood, exhaling slowly, the sound almost blending with the music. Then he reached for the light switch. Outside, the sun had fully set, leaving only the soft, amber glow of the porch light. He stepped out, turning to face the garage, his second home, his sanctuary, his story. He pulled the door closed with quiet finality, the metal latch clicking into place. He lingered a moment, his hand resting on the doorknob, before whispering softly, almost to himself, "Keep it running." Then he turned toward the house. Through the window, warm light spilled from the kitchen where Lindsay and her family laughed softly over dinner. The sound carried faintly through the air, domestic, comforting, alive. Walter walked up the steps, the porch light bathing him in gold. He looked back once, just once, at the closed garage, then smiled. That rare, quiet smile of a man who'd finally rebuilt everything worth keeping. Inside, the journal waited, its final page written, its lesson timeless. It was one of those quiet Texas afternoons that threatened rain, the kind where the sky turned the color of pewter and the air smelled like wet pavement waiting to happen. Walter sat on the porch, a cup of black coffee cooling beside him, his old dog asleep at his feet. The hum of the highway drifted faintly in the distance. It was peaceful, almost too peaceful. He heard the crunch of tires on gravel before he saw the car. A modest sedan rolled up the driveway, unfamiliar yet deliberate, like it belonged there despite the years that had passed. The engine cut off and the door opened. Travis Coleman stepped out. He was older now, not by much in years, but by a lifetime of lessons. The once slick hair was shorter, the tailored suits replaced with a simple jacket and jeans. In his hands, a small bouquet of wildflowers wrapped in plain brown paper. For a long moment, Walter didn't move. He simply watched, coffee steaming faintly beside him. Travis walked slowly up the path, hesitating at the bottom of the porch steps. "Afternoon," he said quietly. Walter nodded once. "Afternoon." Travis shifted, looking unsure of what to do with the flowers. Finally, he held them out. "These are for you. Or for the house, I guess." Didn't seem right to show up empty-handed. Walter took them without a word, setting them gently beside his coffee mug. His silence wasn't cold, just deliberate, the kind that gives space for truth to find its way in. "I came to say thank you," Travis said finally, voice soft but certain, "for teaching me what I couldn't learn from success." Walter looked at him, eyes narrowing just slightly, not in anger, but in understanding. "You learned it the hard way." Travis nodded. "Yeah, and it stuck." He glanced around, at the old truck parked by the garage, the tools hung neatly inside, the porch light that still flickered from time to time. "You ever look back and wish it had gone differently?" Walter leaned back in his chair, thinking. The question lingered like humidity before rain. "Sometimes," he said. "But if it had, I don't think either of us would have learned a damn thing." A faint smile tugged at the corner of Travis's mouth. "Guess not." Walter looked down at the flowers again, then back up. "We all stall sometimes," he said quietly. "Difference is who restarts." The words landed heavier than either of them expected. Travis nodded, emotion flickering across his face. Regret, relief, maybe even peace. "I'm trying to restart," he said. "Been volunteering down at the training center. Jason lets me help with the younger guys. Feels good to build again." Walter nodded approvingly. "That's how you earn your engine back." They stood there for a moment, the air thick but easy now. Two men who'd once been enemies, finding a quiet, earned equilibrium. From inside the house, the door creaked open. Lindsay stepped onto the porch, a dish towel in her hand. She froze when she saw Travis, but her expression softened almost instantly. Travis tipped his head politely. "Hey, Lindsay." She smiled, small, genuine. "Hey, Travis, it's good to see you?" He nodded, eyes lowering in humility. "You too." Walter glanced between them, the faintest trace of contentment passing across his face. Years ago, this porch had been a place of distance. Now it was something closer to redemption. As Travis turned to leave, the first drops of rain began to fall, soft, steady, unhurried. He looked up at the sky, then back at Walter. "You take care of yourself." "You too, son," Walter said. Travis walked to his car, the gravel crunching under his shoes, rain slowly darkening his shoulders. He drove off without another word, the taillights glowing briefly through the mist before disappearing down the road. Lindsay stepped closer to her father, leaning against the porch rail as the rain picked up. "You okay?" she asked. Walter smiled faintly. "Yeah," he said, watching the road. "For the first time, I think we both are." The rain fell harder, drumming softly on the roof. The porch light flickered, then steadied, casting a warm glow on the two of them as they stood together, watching forgiveness drive away into the distance. The afternoon sun sat low over the horizon, burning the sky a deep orange that melted slowly into gold. Walter stood in his driveway, hands resting on the hood of his restored pickup, the same truck that had carried him through humiliation, reflection, and everything in between. Now it gleamed in the dying light, each panel polished to perfection, the chrome mirrors shining like memory itself. He slid into the driver's seat, the leather creaking under his weight. When he turned the key, the engine came alive, steady, smooth, deep. It wasn't just metal and combustion anymore. It was the sound of a man's life, repaired bolt by bolt. The radio crackled softly with an old country tune. Walter chuckled under his breath. He didn't change the station. He just eased the truck out of the driveway and onto the open road, the gravel crunching beneath the tires like applause fading into distance. The town rolled by in quiet snapshots. The diner where he used to eat breakfast on cold mornings, the hardware store that still kept his favorite oil brand in stock, and finally, the dealership. He slowed as he approached it, eyes softening. The sign gleamed under the fading sun. Grayson Motors, built on respect. The letters stood tall against the sky, unwavering. Inside the open shop bay, Jason was working beneath a car, sleeves rolled up, country music echoing faintly from a tinny speaker. When he saw the old pickup roll by, he grinned and stood up, waving a grease-stained hand. Walter tapped the horn twice, the sound short and friendly. Jason laughed, shouting something Walter couldn't hear but understood anyway. A farewell between men who'd built something worth keeping. The truck rolled past, the reflection of the dealership's windows fading in his side mirror. The world ahead opened wide, endless stretches of Texas highway, bathed in the glow of a late light and promise. A soft voiceover began in his head, like the narration of his own story, calm, unhurried, steady as the road beneath his wheels. Engines idle, hearts shouldn't. He smiled faintly at the thought. It sounded like something his wife would have said if she'd been here, or maybe something Eleanor would have teased him about. Either way, it felt right. As the road curved west, the sky deepened, turning copper and rose. Wind whispered through the open window, carrying scents of cedar and rain-soaked asphalt. Walter reached out instinctively, resting one hand on the window frame, the air cool against his skin. He passed a line of fields, stretching far into the horizon, each one painted gold by the sinking sun. The rhythm of the tires on the pavement matched the song playing low on the radio, a steel guitar humming like a heartbeat. His thoughts wandered, but didn't linger. No more anger, no more unfinished sentences. Just a calm, even breath. For a brief moment, he glanced at the passenger seat. The leather there was empty, but his mind filled it anyway, with faces, memories, lessons. His late wife's laughter, Lindsay's childhood questions about engines, Jason's easy loyalty, Travis's humility. All of them rode beside him, silent and steady. He adjusted the rearview mirror and caught sight of the dealership sign one last time, shrinking in the distance. A name once lost to pride now stood for honesty. A circle closed cleanly. The road rose gently ahead, leading toward the open country, where the sun met the land in a blazing horizon. The music swelled. Not dramatic, just right. A country ballad with a simple refrain about second chances and open roads. Walter let out a quiet breath, tapping the steering wheel in rhythm. The corners of his mouth lifted, a small, private smile of contentment. The camera of memory widened. The truck grew smaller against the vast orange sky, its taillights glowing faintly as the world dimmed into evening. The song's last line played over the hum of the engine, soft, steady, resolute. The road stretched on, and Walter Grayson drove toward peace, not away from it. The morning sun spilled across the service bays of Grayson Motors, catching the gleam of fresh paint, polished chrome, and purpose. Inside, the sounds of tools, laughter, and country music mixed into a rhythm that felt alive. The heartbeat of a business rebuilt not on profit, but on pride. A young mechanic, no older than 20, tightened a bolt beneath the hood of a car. Jason leaned over, watching closely. "Not too tight," he said with a grin. "Engines don't like pride. They like balance." The kid laughed, nodding, and eased his hand. Across the floor, more apprentices worked, veterans teaching teenagers, men and women from every walk of life, building something steady together. The dealership had become more than a workplace. It was a school, a refuge, a family. Through the glass of the main office, Lindsay stood in front of a whiteboard, explaining basic finance principles to a group of mechanics taking evening classes. She wore a simple blouse, Her sleeves rolled to the elbow, her voice patient and confident. "Money's just another kind of engine," she told them. "You treat it right, it runs right." Walter watched from the doorway, leaning slightly on the frame, pride and humility warring quietly in his chest. He didn't interrupt. He just smiled, content to listen, the legacy of his lessons now passing through his daughter's voice. Outside, the day dimmed slowly into evening. Workers clocked out, lights flicked off one by one, and the dealership settled into its calm nighttime hum. Then, as always, the sign lit up, a beacon against the dark Texas sky. Grayson Motors, run with heart. The words glowed in soft gold, steady and sure. It had been Jason's idea, but Walter had approved it instantly. "That's what we do," he'd said. "Run with heart." He walked out to the lot, the night air cool against his face. The city lights of Dallas shimmered in the distance, not loud, not overwhelming, just steady. He turned back toward the building, eyes drawn to the glow from his office window. Inside, a framed photo sat on the shelf. Eleanor Briggs, smiling in that knowing way of hers, holding a blueprint between grease-stained fingers. Walter stepped inside, closing the door behind him. The hum of the world outside grew faint, replaced by the soft tick of the wall clock. He stood before the photo for a long moment, his reflection merging with hers in the glass. "Respect restored," he whispered. The words came out quiet but certain, like a prayer finally answered. He reached out, straightening the frame slightly, then turned to the window. From this angle, he could see everything: the darkened showroom, the empty bays, the glowing sign outside. A montage of memory filled the space around him. Jason laughing with his crew, Lindsay handing out certificates to new apprentices, Travis loading donated parts into a truck for the veterans' garage, the hum of the dealership alive with honesty, no longer a place of arrogance, but of second chances. Walter stood there, motionless, a man surrounded by the echo of his own redemption. The hum of the air conditioner faded, replaced by a faint melody from the radio, the same country tune that had played the day he drove that old pickup down the highway. He smiled. The camera pulled back slowly through the office window, rising higher with each passing second. From above, the dealership spread out like a quiet constellation of light against the edge of Dallas. Cars lined neatly in rows, service bays glimmering faintly, and at the center of it all, that sign, steady and golden. Grayson Motors, run with heart. The frame widened further, the Dallas skyline glowing beyond, reflections of neon and glass shimmering like distant stars. As the music swelled, the last image lingered on Walter's small figure standing beneath the light of his creation. Calm, fulfilled, part of something bigger than himself. Then the screen faded to black, and a single line appeared in soft white text. He fixed engines and people. The hum of the dealership carried through the fade-out, steady, rhythmic, alive.